short story called The Bet. Michael had had many dares in his life, but this one was one he'd wished he'd never agreed to. He'd always been scared of ghosts and had never been keen of the dark. Now he would have to endure the possibility of both. He'd lost the bet and there was no going back. He had to do it. His friend Josh was there to see that he was going to go through with it, after being the butt of so many pranks and dares. Hello, viewers. He was getting his own back. It was a warm summer evening, and they sat in the laughing. The last thing Michael wanted to do was to get drunk. He had a tent and a sleeping bag for warmth. He hoped it would be enough. They were both 18 and felt invincible. There were £20 riding on this bet, and Michael desperately needed the money. The sky was slowly darkening, and Michael sipped his drink, and he had a smile on his face. He wasn't happy, he was worried. How he had got into this predicament he didn't know. It was the very thing he didn't want to do. Life seemed to have a sense of humour and loved serving up the things that people didn't want. Finally, they finished their drinks and set off. Michael had his sleeping bag in his rucksack and a bottle of water and a bar of chocolate to cheer him up and give him energy. He had an old-style Walkman with one cassette jammed in there, the Boomtown Rats. An old favourite of his. They set off laughing and joking, but inside Michael was scared. He was too embarrassed to admit it, but he hated the dark, and he had read so many ghost stories and seen so many horror films that his imagination was on fire with scary possibilities. Josh thought it was hilarious and kept cracking jokes at Michael's expense. There was no going back, and with each step he was near his destination, like a man walking the plank. This is the last bet I'll ever make, thought Michael dejectedly, as the first spots of rain fell on his head, and the sky turned as black as his mood. Typical, he thought, and he pulled his hood over his eyes, obscuring his angry face. It wasn't going to be easy putting the tent up in this, he thought. Josh thought of himself as an expert in Michael thought of himself as an expert in outdoor activities, but in fact he knew very little. Just what he'd learnt from being in the Scouts. He knew how to pitch a tent. Michael hoped he was right as the rain fell heavier. The last thing he wanted was to be outside in the rain with a flimsy broken-down tent collapsed around him. Finally they got to the graveyard and it looked spookier than Michael wanted. He gulped as the moonlight shone on the old crumbling headstones, and he felt like he was in a Hammer House of Horror story as the wind and rain whipped around them. Josh opened his rucksack and grabbed his bright blue tent as it fluttered in the wind like a sail. They grabbed a corner each, and Michael struggled to hold it steady as Josh hammered the pegs into the soft, muddy ground. Luckily, they were in the corner of the... Turning the page. Hello, viewers. Please sub me if you like my story. They were in the corner of the graveyard, and the weather was so atrocious that it was unlikely that they would be disturbed. Only the homeless would be out in this weather, thought Josh. It was like securing a blob of jelly. The tent kept moving as if it had a life of its own. Finally, the pegs were hammered down and it became stable. They climbed inside on their hands and knees. Michael was surprised how warm and comfy it was inside, and his fear lessened a little as he emptied his bag of bottled water, chocolate and trusty Walkman. He really hoped the batteries were working, as he needed some entertainment to get him through the long evening. "How's it feel, mate?" said Josh, grinning wildly. "Cool," said Michael. "Should be a piece of cake," he said hopefully. "I'll have to go now, mate. Good luck." He shook his hand and unzipped the tent. This was a big shock and surprise to Michael as he watched Josh walk away until he was a speck in the distance. He was disappointed as he thought he was going to keep him company. Now he felt suddenly alone and frightened. He zipped up the tent and there was no sound, only the constant drip, drip, drip of the rain on the roof and the whistle of the wind. Josh looked at the dark sky through the zip of the tent and the gravestone shone as a reminder of his fate. Hair stood up on the back of his neck as the night came and swallowed all before it, until all he could see was the twinkling of the lights of the town, far, far away in the distance. He zipped up the tent and lay lazily on his back and pondered his fate. A plan formed in his mind, and he would imagine that he was at home in his bedroom and not in this cold, scary, spooky place. And he pushed all of the thoughts to the contrary out of his mind. He only had 10 hours to get through. How hard could it be, he thought, but he would soon find out. He decided to drink the water in one go, as he didn't want to be going to the toilet all night. The chocolate he would eat in stages. He took a quick bite and his mood improved instantly. It was delicious, and he let it slowly melt in his mouth. The rain had stopped to a light drip every few seconds, and the wind had quietened. Josh lay back in his sleeping bag and popped another piece into his mouth. He was getting into a good mood. Hello, viewers. This will be just like a walk in the park, he said to himself. Then he put the headphones on and pressed play. The ticking sounds of light clockwork filled his ears. It had been a while since he'd used his Walkman, and he was amazed at how good it sounded. It was easy to forget that he was outside as the tent warmed up, and he lay comfortable on his back. He needed to stay up late so that he could fall asleep quicker and wake in the morning relieved and victorious. The ticking of the song came to an end, and the rushing of the tape filled his ears. Then another sound dominated. A loud, sharp snap of a twig cut his reverie dead. Please sub me, viewers, if you like it. He pressed pause, and another sound filled his tent. It was thud, thud, thud of his heart, and the realization came to him. He wasn't at home, he was in the open, surrounded by dead bodies, angry crows, and God knows what else. It was like being in an Edgar Allan Poe short story, and he didn't know the ending. He listened intently for footsteps or another crack of a twig, but none came. Sweat ran down his brow and his sweaty palms. He took another bite of chocolate. He ate it slowly, and he tried to make as little sound as possible. Hello, viewers. All of his senses were alert, waiting for the next sound. The ticking of his watch seemed to echo around the tent like thunder. He waited for the next sound. It never came, and through the exhaustion of concentrating so hard, he fell asleep. And then, crunch, 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 the heavy footsteps walked around the tent. Michael sat up in shock and gathered his thoughts. The sounds were unmistakable, heavy, and getting nearer. This is it, he thought. I'm done for. He looked at his watch. It was 4 a.m. No time for anyone to be around in this pitch-dark graveyard. He wished he'd brought a knife for protection, but would he be able to use it? Closer and closer the footsteps sounded until they were around the tent. Michael was too terrified to move, but he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just wait to be attacked. He had to act. It was then that he heard more shallow breathing outside. He didn't know if he was dealing with a person or a spectre. He wasn't going to wait to find out. It was time to be brave, no matter the consequences. He pulled the zipper down and peered into the dark. The footsteps had stopped, but the breathing continued. He struck his head out and half expected it to be chopped off by an axe-wielding maniac. It was then that he saw a figure in the distance who appeared to sway in the moonlight. This is it, he thought. I'm done for. And then the ghostly figure walked towards him with the same breathing sounds. He had to say something. He had to speak up. As he did so, a bright beam of light struck him in the face, blinding and disorientating him. The figure came closer. Michael squinted into the glare. "Who are you?" he shouted, half terrified of the response. His eyes adjusted to the glare, and a man wearing a big coat and hat walked towards him with something in his hand. A weapon, no doubt, thought Michael. "Don't worry, son," the man said. "I'm just having an early morning stroll." Michael considered this unlikely possibility, but he decided to go with it. The man stood before him, and in his hand was not a weapon, but a silver torch and a Jack Russell at his feet, panting and sending clouds of frosty breath into the air. Michael sighed a sigh of relief, and the man went on his way. But not before asking a pertinent question. Oh dear. What are you doing camping out in this graveyard anyway? He said, incredulous. For a bet, Michael answered truthfully, and they both laughed. Well, I hope you win, the man replied as he ambled off into the foggy distance. The next evening, Josh and Michael sat in their local, and Josh quizzed him how it had gone. He didn't want to admit it, but he was impressed. He would never have done it on his own. Oh, it was a piece of cake, mate, Michael said, sipping his pint leisurely. Not scary then, said Josh, looking impressed. Oh, not at all, said Michael convincingly, and he gladly accepted his £5 winnings and secretly vowed never to go near graveyards late at night ever again. Hope you like that story, viewers. Thank you for subbing me.